Welcome to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Ben Lloyd Pearson.
And I'm your host, Andrew Ziegler.
This week, I'm joined by Stack Overflow's Erin Yepis to break down the insights from the 2025 Developer Survey. We dig into the reality behind the data, exploring the shrinking pipeline of junior talent, the growing disconnect between using a tool and actually trusting it, and what the latest numbers really tell us about developer happiness and retention. But first, let's discuss today's stories. Today, we have quantum physicists lobotomizing an LLM, getting chart happy with the AI boom, and remembering to pause and rest around the holidays.
That's an interesting little lineup. I'm very curious about that lobotomy article you mentioned, but I'll ask you, Ben, where do you want to start?
Yeah, well, before we get into any of that, I actually have another article that came across my desk that I wanted to cover. It's titled Dev AI Beyond Hype and Denial. And this article came in, and I really wanted to cover it. It's been out for a few weeks, but I wanted to cover it because it really, I feel like, taps into the zeitgeist of where AI is today. AI is dramatically accelerating code generation, but the software delivery bottleneck has just shifted to other parts of the SDLC. So it's things like requirements, testing, deployment. And when you really think about raw code output, it's a kind of a vanity metric in that context. And you also have these forces where like AI assisted code bases, they decay from a greenfield project into like legacy with technical debt a lot faster than ever. So, things that may have taken you years or months in the past, now might happen in a matter of days or week, especially if you lack strong engineering discipline. So when you think about AI in the context of development, it's really great at things like prototyping, like simple front end work, integrations that have clear structure, but it often struggles with more complex business logic and can create a lot of quality issues. And one of the risks of all of this is that engineers that work with AI are likely to retain less knowledge with their code base because they don't make a lot of micro decisions during the implementation process, which that can make things like debugging and maintenance significantly harder over time. So there's some great recommendations from this article about how, if you want to have sustainable AI adoption, you want to have experienced engineers who can design clear requirements up front, enforce strong modularization, and know when to override AI suggestions rather than just blindly accepting AI generated code. What did you think about this article, Andrew?
I really enjoyed reading this article. I think it placed itself right at the center of a story that we've been covering a lot on Dev Interrupted this year. His analogy about the SDLC being a factory and things moving from part to part and the ultimate reality of having really, really fast code generation just creates bottlenecks in that system. That's a story and a beat we've been covering all year and talking about the importance of for people to understand. But also, I feel like this article even related itself with last week's article we covered from Kent Beck that talked about how the usage of AI generated code often pushes developers into corners where they lose future opportunities. And the accumulation of this technical debt slows you down, like dramatically down. And Kent kind of drew out this picture, but this article actually drills down on some specific anecdotal examples that they have from working with colleagues on AI projects. So I feel like it was really grounded in personal experience. I do also feel like it even talks a little bit to last week's article that was written by Josh Phillips about how he created a really highly deterministic system based on his interdisciplinary skills and how he approached using the LLM. And frankly, I feel like if they both talked, they would actually be able to share a lot of insights on each other's approaches. I see gaps in this article that Josh's system addresses and vice versa. So it really kind of shares the importance of us as, bringing these stories together and talking about them, and for our readers to go and investigate them themselves, because that's how you develop these sharp opinions about what's going on. So I wanted to call that out as how this story placed itself at the center of what we've been covering.
Awesome. Well, let's get into our next story. Quantum physicists have shrunk and decensored DeepSeek R1. What's going on here, Andrew?
This is a really cool article to read about a Spanish quantum computing firm. They compressed DeepSeek R1 by over 50%. So what that means is they used quantum physics and some AI modeling techniques to shrink the actual tensor size of the model by half. And in doing so, they were able to very clearly map basically the kind of material that DeepSeek is trained on. DeepSeek, we all know, a very large and popular open source Chinese model. And this gives us a glimpse into the censorship behind the creation and the proliferation of these models. Because in the process of reducing the size of the model by half, it exposed clear censorship pathways and allowed them to effectively, partially de-censor DeepSeek. But what does that really mean? It's a really nuanced question that this article explores. We invite you to go check it out as well to get a clearer look at how the creation of these models and how teams use them really can be influenced by governments, by systems, by policymakers. It's a really fascinating glimpse. Ben, what did you think of this article and what this computing firm accomplished?
Yeah, well, it's been a while since I've thought about DeepSeek. I checked this tool out when it first launched and was actually a little fascinated with the censorship capabilities they built into it because it was kind of one of a kind. But just setting aside that, there's inherent biases with all of these models anyway, so censorship is sort of a like ingrained behavior in a way. Sometimes it's more explicit in the case of DeepSeek than it is in others. But I really like there's two big things that I took away from this article that I really like that have absolutely nothing to do with censorship, as a matter of fact. The first is that this research really shows how easy it is to manipulate the behavior of an LLM without investing major resources into training new models. So that should be helpful to basically anyone that is trying to improve their LLM's performance. But second, I kind of think it takes this like era of content ejection that we're in to a new level. Like one of my favorite features of working with AI is how easy it is to extract valuable information from a GPT and
Mhm.
use that to either build or improve other workflows. I'm even seeing this with like products that I'm using that have AI capabilities built into them. Like if they have an AI chatbot that can describe their product, you can use AI to extract a lot of the valuable components of that product and then go off and rebuild it somewhere else, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon. So really, I think what's happening is we're entering an era where AI systems are becoming transparent extraction targets. The same tools that help us build all of these intelligence layers can help us reverse engineer, repurpose, and rebuild it. So it's just a really cool story, I think.
I totally agree. It's a great roundup.
All right, AJ, let's talk about the 16 charts that explain the AI boom now.
This next article is a roundup of 16 charts that show the comparison of the AI expenditures and its intertwinedness with the economy, with other major projects that come to mind as like major technology and industry partnerships that were very formative and extremely important for the modern world we live in. We're talking about things like the Manhattan Project that powered nuclear research, but also NASA's spending on the Apollo program during the race to the moon in the 60s, and also the broadband build out of the dot-com boom, creating the interstate highways that connect the United States. And they all are dwarfed by the capital expenditures by leading tech companies and the amount of resources they're pouring into winning this cycle of growth. And there's a lot of charts here to roll through. I recommend you go and check them out because the world moves so fast paced. Some of these charts are already, I think, even outdated. And so maybe there's new opportunities to draw conclusions there. But Ben, what did you think? What stood out to you the most when you were looking at these charts and how they told the story of AI's impact on our economy?
Yeah, I mean that's your last point there is really kind of the main point is just how rapidly all of this is still changing in real time. But the big thing that stands out to me is just how capital expenditures on AI have gone absolutely vertical in the past 12 months. I personally think that we're right around peak AI hype in this moment. Like, when you think about the conventional hype cycle, we may be at the very top of the ride right now. And the comparisons to past major initiatives like the Manhattan Project is certainly paints a very stark picture. But there's a couple of things that come up frequently that I thought were pretty interesting. The first is that power consumption growth is significant for all of this AI data center construction. But when you look at it in the grand scale of things, like for example, electric vehicles becoming more popular, those that is contributing substantially more to energy demand than AI is. So, on the power front, like, yeah, AI does consume a lot of power, but it's, there's a lot of other things that consume far greater amounts. But then, water usage, something that we've covered a few times here, it really does look like an overrated problem, at least at the macro level. Even when you are accounting for the additional power consumption that these AI plants need. So, I would say like at the local level, water consumption is still a concern. Like you should price water locally so that it's fair for commercial purposes, to encourage that they efficiently use it and that they're building in places with adequate water supply. So that's, that is a concern. But at the macro level, it doesn't really seem to be, it's a drop in the bucket, so to speak. But I really think like what is the most telling graphic in all of this is the chart of OpenAI cash flow projections. So
Yeah.
their latest projection is that they'll reach a peak negative cash flow of $40 billion in losses in 2028. So a full 2 years. I mean, basically 3 years out at this point.
Mhm.
And then somehow they reverse that in 2029, and then by 2030 they expect to have a fairly substantial positive cash flow, which is a little scary to me. But what really stood out to me was that they expect ChatGPT revenue to plateau while things like their APIs, their agents, and their free user monetization continue to grow at like a 2 to 3x year-over-year rate over the coming years. And that is a little concerning to me, because you think about like the API, there really isn't a moat around the API except for the performance of their models. If someone else has a better performing model, developers will just migrate to that API. On the agent side, like there's a lot of companies building UX moats around agents, but in my opinion, we still kind of operate in a world of keeping the agentic framework separate from the model choices. I think that's a pretty valid separation. And then free user monetization. I mean, that just seems like the biggest wild card in all of this, because free users are going to go to whatever platform gives them the best user experience. So, and then that's not even like mentioning the incumbent players like Google, who are really seen to be having their moment with Gemini 3. I'm sure OpenAI in particular is feeling a lot of competitive pressure. So, yeah, my takeaway, we're at peak AI hype, but peak hype is exactly when clear thinking on these things becomes a competitive advantage. So, and that's what we really want Dev Interrupted to be here for. Like, we want to be your source for staying grounded in the trends that will outlive the hype, so that when this all dies down, you're still in a great spot.
That's right.
Cool. All right. And I think to close it out, we have one more article from a good friend of the show, Kelly Vaughn. What do we have here, Andrew?
Yes, we grabbed this one from our feed. This is from Kelly Vaughn, article called "You'll Be Shaky Before You're Steady." And it talks about the uncomfortable feeling with being in a new workplace and having to settling into those new norms, and really kind of sets a better mental framing to keep you from becoming your own worst enemy in these moments. We love covering Kelly's insights as an engineering manager about how to do things like avoid burnout, but also get ahead in your career, become a better leader, a better manager, and a better software writer. She's been a guest on Dev Interrupted many times, and this article hits on really kind of the core of her story on her blog after burnout. So this imposter syndrome that new folks face and in new workplaces, it can persist for up to 6 months. This is a very normal psychological experience with being in new environments, and it's always good to call these things out, especially around time of the holidays, where we also definitely emphasize the practice of taking time off, making sure you're spending time for yourself and others. If you're not following Kelly on LinkedIn, she posts some really funny stuff, even things about like taking a day off of work so she could listen to the new Taylor Swift album. It's totally relatable for myself as well and many of our listeners. And so I just wanted to call out that, doing this kind of stuff and talking about it in the open is really normal and great. And I'm glad that she's normalizing it. And I love being part of that conversation, and you should too. So be sure to look out for yourself. But Ben, what stood out to you from this piece from Kelly?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to dive into any discussions about Taylor Swift, but yeah, we just had our Thanksgiving week here in the U.S. So Andrew, you, Adam, our producer, and I, and myself, we all took some time off to spend it with family and friends, and the holidays are here and coming up additionally. So it's just a good time to think about these types of challenges, to make sure that you're healthy, that your team is healthy, and the kinds of things you can do to make sure that you're not getting burnt out during this time of year. So
Absolutely.
awesome. Well, after my break is my conversation with Erin. Stick around. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Erin Yepis, Research Manager, Market Research and Insights at Stack Overflow. Erin, it is lovely to have you back on the show. We had you last year to cover the Stack Overflow Developer Survey, and it was one of our favorite episodes. We're thrilled to have you returning for the 2025 edition of this.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be back as well, and definitely back to be talking about the developer survey.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll link to the full survey in the show notes. It's been out for a couple of months, so this isn't quite the latest coverage or the latest news on it, but we definitely wanted to make sure we got some time to cover it this year. And as always, it is just packed with a ton of fascinating data, and I feel like I still haven't got enough time to just really dive into it because there's a lot that I've just sort of been picking up as I've been looking at these charts. But we got plenty of time here to get into the details on it, but I just want to start by covering some of the things that are new in it this year. So, for our listeners who may have missed last year's show, let's maybe Aaron, if you could just give us a quick overview of the methodology behind the 2025 survey. Like how many developers did you get to respond? Were there any new areas of focus or things that you changed from last year? Just at a high level, like what's different this year?
Yes. So this year we ran the survey. We launched it at the very end of May and we closed June 23rd in 2025. We got responses from just over 49,000 developers worldwide, covering 166 different countries. This year, the survey was very different. A lot of it was the same. The survey that developers on Stack Overflow have come to know and love, but we changed a lot. And I would say two of the big changes can be summed up with the technology section, updating what technologies we were asking about some new ones, and specifically some of the new technologies we were asking about were AI agents. So sort of building on the new questions we've been asking since 2023 about AI tool usage at work in the developer's workflow, but more specifically AI agents and what tools developers are using for specific steps of the agentic workflow.
Yeah, I really loved the agentic stuff when I was digging into it, and I feel like there's probably a lot of potential for growth in that area for future surveys too. So, there's the obvious like increased focus on AI, which we're definitely going to talk about. But are there any other like major trends or changes that you think define like the landscape for developers in 2025 compared to what we saw last year? Because last year I feel like we were in the midst of a lot of new exciting things with AI. There's still so much uncertainty around it. And I feel like now we're starting to get a little bit more clarity and certainty around AI within software developers' life. But, I'm just wondering like what kind of changes you've seen over the last year.
Yeah, so a couple of big ones, especially related to AI. We saw that AI usage number increasing for us. And I mean, there are a lot of surveys out there that have wildly different numbers for AI usage, but we
Yeah,
try to be more specific, asking more granular questions this year. But yeah, so AI usage bumped up to 84%. One of the other big things, I was digging into after the survey results came back was just the shift in the age ranges for the developers that are responding to our survey.
yeah,
We've noticed from all the way back to 2022, sort of like a decline in the proportion of 18 to 24-year-olds that are responding to the survey. And
interesting.
yeah, I think that, our Stack Overflow is a platform that really attracts experienced developers, those people that have those complex questions and also have answers to those complex questions. So it's not totally surprising, but I did try to go out and sort of validate, is this like a bigger shift that we see? I think it's corroborated by a lot of news stories and some statistics that are related from sites like Indeed, and definitely like some of the labor statistics that come out, that these junior roles are there's less of them.
Mhm.
That new graduates are having a hard time finding their entry level roles. But we also have seen in other sources, such as slash data has a developer survey. They were sort of also capturing a slightly lower amount of 18 to 24-year-olds, not as low as ours was. But also last year's JetBrains developer survey had about the same proportion of 18 to 24-year-olds that we saw. Interestingly enough, the JetBrains developer survey recently, the new one, 2025 one came out, and they had almost, I want to say, a 10% percentage point bump in 18 to 24-year-olds this year, but
Okay.
they have a lot more respondents from China,
Mm.
whereas we do not. We have a lot of respondents that are based in North America, Europe, UK, India. So I think that might have something to do with it. But I do think that what we're seeing, it's not biased. It's maybe a little bit biased by our community on Stack Overflow, but that I think there's like a larger trend for just less software developers that are younger.
Yeah, that's actually a really fascinating insight, and it kind of aligns with something that I've been I don't know if anticipating is the right word, but sort of predicting in a way, is that in the short term, a lot of the junior roles are going to be heavily disrupted within software development because so much change is happening, and we're seeing that like with AI in particular, like a senior engineer with AI seems to be able to extract a lot more value out of the tool versus a junior engineer. If they're using AI the wrong way, they actually I think, can create more challenges and more problems than they actually can get benefit from it. But I've also wondered, if that is temporary, like maybe the disruption to the lower end of the job market is just a natural like response to so much disruption happening, so much uncertainty. People are a little more cautious when hiring junior developers. But I've also had this theory that within a couple of years, you're going to start to see people come out of college armed with AI capabilities right out the gate, and then suddenly the junior role, maybe what we consider a junior role today starts to look more like a senior role today, and the senior role like continues to evolve and become more high level. So I've kind of had this theory that maybe these disruptions we're seeing are actually only like a 2 to 4 year temporary disruption, and we might just be in the midst of it, which is pretty fascinating. But speaking of jobs, I mean, one of the big topics we talked about last year was developer job satisfaction because there's sort of a shocking number from last year's result about how few developers were happy with their employment situation. So last year the big alarming takeaway was that only 1 in 5 developers were happy at their job. So 80% were either complacent or unhappy at their work. And this year, the survey says that that number is about 1 in 4 developers are happy at their current job. So, do you think that this represents like some sort of like actual real improvement, or is it just like a minor shift in like what is otherwise like a more complacent workforce?
I do believe it's a meaningful shift. I'm looking at uh, percentage points all the time. So anything that's above 2 percentage point difference, I'm like, that means something.
Yeah.
But more so again, because this is an NPS rating score for this question, there's less of that sort of wishy-washiness for the people that are happy. Those are people that definitely agreed at the very top of the score that they are happy at work. Um, I definitely think also that so as you were mentioning with the sort of shift in roles and the disruption, what we were seeing, like there's been those charts that have come out about openings and hirings for technology related jobs may be just sort of normalizing back to pre-pandemic levels.
Mm.
So, they were feeling that a lot more in 2024, I
Yeah.
think, than in 2025. And so with all of that churn, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's more people that were fired or hired necessarily between last year's survey and this year's survey. But I think maybe just a little less of that churn in your workplace can contribute to what was maybe causing some of that discontent. And also, I think that as we've been more getting used to these AI tools at work, there might be a little bit of that effect of the like the Stanley Kubrick film, How I Stopped Worrying and Learned to Love the Bomb,
Yeah.
where they maybe whatever was like on the horizon that they were worried about now is just like I can't really be worried about that anymore.
Yeah, it's like we all spent last year throwing AI slop at each other and kind of decided, you know what, maybe this isn't the right way to do it, so we should just get a little more refined in our AI usage.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, thinking back to a year ago, I mean, we were on this show covering quite frequently just all of the round after round of layoffs that were happening at a lot of the big companies, primarily the companies that did really hire tons during the pandemic. And there's still some elements of that I think are still happening, but it certainly doesn't feel like it's a thing that's happening every week anymore. And I'm sure that, better job security, less uncertainty around the future probably does play a pretty significant role in overall satisfaction. And I think the survey also may have mentioned that there was also a pay bump that happened for a lot of developers too over the last year. I'm wondering, like, is there anything that you found that was interesting about like pay in terms of how that's going for developers?
Um, yes, I think that again, well, specifically, we noticed that for experience levels. So, for developers that have been working with code for 10 years or more, their job satisfaction is higher than any other experience level. Some of the earlier career developers and mid career developers. So I think that has something to do with it. Experienced developers would be commanding a higher salary as well. They know more about what's possible, what they have a skill set in to find those roles that they are going to be very good at. Um, and besides that, I think again, and we talked about this last year, the effect of which country you live in is tied to salary, is tied to the roles that you're able to find, and is definitely tied to job satisfaction as well. So I think like last year we were talking about how developers in the Netherlands are pretty happy. Looking specifically at the developers that were unhappy this year, we see that at the top of the list, we had India and Germany and Australia for and specifically for back-end developer roles, which is a role that is
Yeah.
like one of the most popular roles that people responding to the survey have. But it's also kind of ambiguous. You're doing like that role is defined very differently in various different places. And I think that in those countries also like pay probably has something to do with it. Just work conditions is one thing, but what you're getting paid is another and related.
Yeah, it's fascinating that experienced developers tend to be more happy, and I wonder if this has something to do with a trend that I've started to pick up on, and that a lot of people who have been in the industry for a while view what's happening right now as like this extremely exciting time to get back into building. So if you've found yourself in a role where you're more strategic, or you're managing, or you're being a team lead, and maybe you've spent the last few years not building as much, but helping teammates, managing even. Now you can take all of those skills that you gained from years of being a builder, plus all of that strategic capability and knowledge, and with AI, you're able to do so much more than we've been able to do in the past. And it almost makes like the role exciting again in many ways, because I have certainly felt this. Like, I started my career doing a lot of like sysadmin automations type development work. And the things that I'm able to do with AI back when I started my career, I mean, it's incredible how much faster I'm able to do things that would have taken me hours or even days back then. So pretty fascinating to hear, experience. Like, it definitely tracks with what I'm personally feeling and what I'm seeing from other people in the industry. But, with all that said, so, it seems like roughly one and a quarter, or one out of every four developers are happy. About one out of every four developers are unhappy with their job. That's a pretty equal split. And then in the middle, you have about half of developers that are still feeling complacent. about their work. So I'm wondering what the data tells you specifically about, these developers. Like what seems to be leading to still having complacency being the most common reaction that developers have for their job.
So we also asked in a survey similar to last year, but a little bit differently. We asked developers, respondents to rank what attributes of their job contribute most to being satisfied at work. And so for everyone, those were like at the top of the list is autonomy at work,
Hmm.
followed by compensation, followed by solving real world problems. I would say for those that are complacent at work, they're still those are still very important things to them, but they're probably just ranked slightly differently, depending again on role. So role, I think, is probably a huge driver of why and experience level of why you are or are not satisfied with your current job where you're working. But then so there's individual shifts for, what at this point in your career is more important to you. So compensation is important to everyone, but I think that as you get more experience at work or more experience in your specific role, the other two things sort of start like shifting with each other in terms of importance. That autonomy at work is something that we see shift a lot with different roles and different experience levels. With the less experienced developers, autonomy at work is not as important. And I think that's because they're trying to learn, and learning comes with collaboration and having like some direction and having some mentorship. I definitely think for the complacency factor, it's just like having sort of like the the importance that you assign to those top 3 factors is sort of shifting a little bit, and you have a little bit of more of one than the other in your current position.
Yeah, interesting. So I wanna pivot just a little bit to the subject that we always end up talking about on every episode of Dev Interrupted nowadays, and that's AI, specifically sentiment and usage around it. And I think the big takeaway that we had when we looked over this data was this sort of almost conflicting trend that we see a little bit of. So in the survey, it says 84% of respondents are either using or planning to use AI, which, we already mentioned that. I think it tracks with a lot of other surveys that we've seen out there, like the Door report just came out a few weeks ago and said, I think about 90% of developers are using AI on a frequent basis. And that's up from, the Stack Overflow survey is up from 76%. So it's a noticeable jump. But at the same time, positive sentiment for AI has actually decreased by about 10% from 70% to 60%. So, like, what's going on here? Were we in the honeymoon phase last year and that's wearing off, or is there something else happening?
So it is very interesting, and it's been probably the most intriguing finding from the survey, I will say. I think the what we also see, I know, is that as I had mentioned at the top, we changed this question a little bit to be more granular. Like, if you use AI tools, are you using them daily, weekly, or monthly, or less frequently? And so we see there is a correlation between developers that mentions they use AI tools daily or weekly and their favoritism towards AI tools in general. So they have higher favorability scores than those that said they use it less frequently or are planning to. I think that speaks to, again, as you have gone through the learning curve, you have found something that works for specific purposes, you've seen it succeed. And in the areas where you have problems, you know how to troubleshoot those problems. With the again, I know I one of my other favorite questions from this year's survey, I don't think a lot of the respondents liked it because I had to read their responses, was the one about vibe coding.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the responses for that question, there's a lot of responses that are like, I tried to use this and, 3 out of 4 times it was wrong. So the hallucination factor. And I think that is so if you're not using these tools as frequently, that the effect of I came to this restaurant once. I'm giving it a 1-star Yelp review. It was too frustrating to even like go back to or try to find an alternative because of the bad experience I had a handful of times infrequently. And I'm here to like tell everyone about that. The Again, we're still in the honeymoon phase, I think, like you said. There's a lot of maybe turmoil in trying to find like the right tool for the right job, and also finding the time to learn how to use these tools. We asked another question specifically in the last year. Did you learn to code for AI? And about 2/3 of respondents mentioned that they had learned to code for AI in the past year, but only half of them did it at work, and the other half did it for personal projects or at home. So that also, I think, speaks to you're not getting enough time at work to even like learn, set up a foundational basis for how would I use this? When is an appropriate time to use this? What are the skills that I need to get better at using this for this specific use case? And also, besides that, we have like a cool chart that sort of pivots that sentiment score against what the specific uses that you're using AI tools for. So while most developers are using it for search and code completion, you see that favorability score drop for some of the other use cases. The less used use cases, deployments is a big one. So I think that there are some complex things that we're just in the beginning stages of getting the right tools for that job, and then now we have to get the people in those roles used to and time to learn how to use those tools for that specific job.
Yeah, I really love your restaurant analogy, because I even feel like there's a big element of, "Oh, well, I went to that restaurant 6 months or a year ago when they first opened and the service stunk, so I never gave them another shot." And I feel like AI has gone through a very similar sort of, transformation or impact because, a year ago, context windows were tiny and hallucinations were a big problem because of it. But today, context windows have gotten much larger. The reasoning has gotten better. So things that, didn't work at all a year ago now may actually work just straight out of the box. And we've also seen, there's sort of like an inverted bell curve with AI adoption. Like when a developer first adopts AI, they're like, "Wow, this is new and exciting. There's so many cool things I can do with it." And they get to sort of that like intermediate level and they start to see all the problems, all the failures that it has, and they like their perception will often drop and think, "Wow, this is terrible. Like why am I wasting my time with this?" But then that curve comes back as they get better with it, as they start to use it. They find use cases that they can use it daily or weekly. Suddenly their eyes get opened and they're kind of back at the top of the perception curve where they're like, wow, this is incredible. Like my productivity is way up. I'm doing things that I never thought I would be able to do before. So I imagine there's probably some sort of element of that too, where a lot of people are still sort of stuck in that middle area where they've seen the potential, but when they've tried to implement it in reality, they're still struggling. And it definitely resonates or relates to what I'm hearing from just people in my own personal network. Like I know a lot of really brilliant engineers who are doing AI constantly in their free time, like in their nights and weekends, just like again, like that getting excited about building again. And they're doing all these really amazing personal projects, but then they get to work and they're like, well, I can't really figure out how to apply like what I'm doing at home to my work environment because we have so many additional constraints that just make it unfeasible. So and I think that my one of my favorite stats from this whole survey is and I resonate with this as somebody who uses AI daily. I still resonate with this stat, but 66% of developers are frustrated with AI solutions that are almost right but not quite. And and this may be a big source of like declining sentiment. What other frustrations are you seeing like from developers who are reporting lower levels of satisfaction?
Yeah, so I think again, going back to that, the experience level speaks a lot to this. So we see, based on experience level, these developers are using very different tools. They have experience with different AI tools. And it definitely is related to um the restrictions that you have at work, the we have to use Microsoft Copilot at work,
Yeah.
and I don't like that. We have to use, insert blank here. So I think it has a little bit to do with that. Whereas, like for the early career developers, or especially those that are learning, they're playing around with some of the sandbox areas, the free trials, the non-commercial use tools that especially like we have there's free versions of almost all of the IDEs, that maybe not so much anymore, but of the at least back earlier in 2025. So, they were not beholden to maybe those strict larger organization enterprise wide, like we're locking this down. You can't try this new one that came out, or the one that everyone's buzzing about. But I think it also has to do with the fact that when you see in that chart that sort of pits the favorability scores against the what are you using these tools for, uh, there because there are some tools that I think are marketed as they can do it all. The fact is that they technically can do it all, but they do some things better and other things not as well. So they are having frustrations with okay, we were sold, or our company was sold this, we're locked in, and now my role, I have to do deployments. This is not helping me. So I think it's those frustrations of like, we need a different tool for this. I need a different AI tool, or I need a different AI agent. I need a different integration, something that is, I think, more tied to work. Definitely work and experience level.
Yeah, that's really interesting because just think about my own usage. I am absolutely not whatsoever beholden to a single tool. I found that there are certain things that Claude is amazing at, and there are certain things that it's terrible at. So I try to use it for the stuff that I love it for and avoid it for the other things. And the same's for Chat GPT, the same's for basically every model that I've used. And then you have all the tools that are built upon those models as well that are all sort of built for different functions. So definitely checks out with my personal experience. And so building on this, the survey found that a lot of developers actively distrust the accuracy of AI tools more so than they trust them. How are you seeing this trust deficit play out? Like, does it, in particular, I'm wondering, like, does it differ between like professional developers and those who are still learning to code? Or is it, sort of just based on what you were describing, like the professionals are sort of stuck with a certain tool set, and because of that, they have lower levels of trust?
Well, so we do see that trust score improves slightly with younger developers, less experienced or younger in age, but not by much. I think more so, it's not that it's like it shouldn't be seen as a negative effect of AI tools, rather that with more usage comes the knowledge that AI tools should not be fully trusted. That is part of the deal. That is built into like the foundational knowledge when you start using them, especially at work. Your InfoSec team sets you up with a lot of these trainings every year about phishing, and then don't click on these links, and do not answer the phone and give someone your boss's email address and phone number. There's lots more information now than there was back when AI tools first started coming out, that is like, no, this is trust but verify, trust but verify. Uh, do not start with trust. This is you are the human is the important part of this equation. The AI tool is here to help you expand on what you were already doing, but trust begins and ends with the human. So rather than seeing it as like this is maybe the quality is changing, or anything about that, it's more that developers are smarter. The whole world is smarter. We know we're not supposed to trust AI tools completely.
Yeah, it's funny because there's so few tools in our workflow that you would use the word trust with. Like, do you trust your IDE? It's like, well, I trust it as far as I can build something with it.
Well, there's like specific tools that have the word trust in them.
Yeah. I mean, if you're thinking about like a security tool, for example, like trust is a
Yeah.
huge aspect of it. Like, do you trust that it's actually catching the things that are important to your organization? Yeah. So I want to get a little bit more into like workflows and developer tooling. So, and specifically talking about how developers are using these tools. So one of the distinctions that the Stack Overflow survey made this year was between, and you already touched on this a little bit, between AI tools and AI agents, and found that the majority of developers are still not using agents, with 38% saying they actually have no plans to at all at this point. So can you first of all define what the survey calls, or how the survey defines an agent? Because there's a lot of different definitions for that term. And then let's talk a little bit about why you think that adoption may be lagging for that.
Yes, and I just pulled up the survey website because for all of these stats, we have the actual question that we used in the survey printed alongside it so I can keep myself honest. But so for AI agents, we specifically said AI agents refer to autonomous software entities that can operate with minimal to no direct human intervention using artificial intelligence techniques. I know that sounds vague, but it's definitely less vague than how we defined do you use AI tools, which is uh, the only thing we were specific about there is like, are you using this for development at work? Not just like asking ChatGPT over the weekend, where should we go get dinner? Because we're all doing that. And that would just say 100%. But so yeah, for AI agents, we have like a lower a usage score there. I think that makes sense. The fact is, and I try to be, specific and generic because I think what an agent means, it's marketed in one way. I think, when Salesforce came out with Agentforce and a lot of the marketing around that, it made it seem like agents were just something that you like extensions that are part of like enterprise SaaS programs. But as time has moved on, like agents are something that is definitely a part of open source, huge part of open source software right now. And are that's probably a bigger place where you see like the sort of the growth of like what an agent can do. What exactly does that mean for a software developer's job? So and even though I try to be like have that sort of all-encompassing definition, I do believe that that marketing tactic is a little sticky. So when they see that question, they're like, "No, I don't have this enterprise software solution that says agent in the title." I think that might be part of it. But, the other part of it is, especially for the professional developers, which, a huge segment of the software respondents are of the survey respondents, apologies, are professional developers. A lot of them are experienced professional developers, and at their work, that, again, with the locking down, like, you can use these tools. This is what is okay to use at work. Agents, they're like, "No, we have to verify all of this. There's too many of them, and that sounds like it will be more of a security risk." So I believe that maybe a little bit of the lag there is just speaking towards like the workplace getting up to speed with what they can and cannot use. What is an agent doing for them?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the challenge with agents is that I don't really know of a single agent out there that you can just buy off the shelf and start using like on day one. A lot of this stuff takes a lot of effort to build. Even if you are buying a product, you still have to get your organization ready to use that agent effectively, whether it's like cleaning up the data that you feed into it, or having processes built around it. And I think that's, a lot of the challenges of adopting an agent is actually organizational. It's not even like a tooling problem. It is a technical problem because often, giving an agent everything it needs to be effective does require, technical work. Um, but it really feels like a lot of the challenges are organizational. And, speaking of that, one of the things that caught my eye in this survey is how agents are being incorporated into development workflows. So, the report specifically mentions that there's a lot of personal productivity gains that that agent users are seeing. Um, but there doesn't really seem to be a whole lot of team collaboration improvement that's coming out of them yet. So, it seems almost like these AI agents are currently like a solo productivity tool in particular. Like, do you think that's going to change sometime soon, or what do you think is contributing to that?
Yeah, I definitely do think that's going to change. And even in my own limited experience of starting to work with AI agents and see what they can do for my job, so specific example is we have a tool at work that is approved and they allow you to connect agents or create your own. I was partnering with another researcher and we're like, yeah, let's build this agent. Let's go. Let's learn how to do it. And I go to configure it and I can't share it with her. I can't share my configuration in the UI with her. So there's that. It's like literally built sometimes to not be as I think less so on the open source side, but for these enterprise ones that have been approved by work, it's like not yet there. Like the collaboration options are limited for some of them, maybe. But also the other part of it is I think that you have that's a cultural thing. Collaboration that has to come from your team, your leadership, that has to be built into the way that you do work. And they have to be pushing, your managers or whoever team leads are pushing should be pushing like these projects like let's get collaboration. The goal is collaboration and now let's try to implement an AI tool for this specific project, or we have to complete this project. Let's see if there's any creative ways that we can do parallel work with an AI tool that we have, or start playing around with a new agent that we are trying to see if it may work if we want to buy the licensing for. So that I think more is it has to come from the workplace, the collaboration part. But then also there are those technical capabilities that they have not built that into some of these tools yet. I will say, as far as collaboration goes, though, that I've seen they've been coming out with a lot more, especially for stuff that is related to CI/CD and GitHub, for instance, and trying to like get agents plugged in there. That's built for collaboration. So
Yeah.
whenever there's a way to sort of integrate it into tools that are collaboration positive. There is an interesting tool that I've been playing around with, still trying to get it set up like regularly is a spec story. So the whole point of that is that in your PRs, you're sharing what it is that you and the agent were doing. Anyone
Mhm.
can read that.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, just thinking back to like where I was a year ago, just generally speaking about AI, like not even agents, but a year ago, I feel like the technology was changing so rapidly. The tools we were using was still relatively immature. It was really challenging for me to share what I was building for myself with other people on the team because by the time I share it, like some of what I share becomes irrelevant, or it might be that I built this thing specifically for myself, and there's not a whole lot to like take and adapt to other parts of the organization. But sometime in the last 3 to 6 months, I've started to feel that shifting where now the tooling is catching up to our team needs, and we're able to more openly share things that we build, AI services that we build with each other, give each other tips that actually like sort of like have a lasting value rather than just being an immediate value to yourself. So yeah, it is a hopeful trend, I think, for agents as a whole. And I'm not going to let you leave without talking about one of my favorite subjects right now, and that is vibe coding. And I know this always generates a bit of controversy when you bring this up. But in the survey, most respondents, so about 72%, are not vibe coding today, at least according to their own admission. And an additional 5% are emphatic about it not being a part of their development workflows. And this kind of flies in the face of what you'll see from all the people out on social media, either saying vibe coding is amazing and it's the future, or it's the worst thing ever and no one should ever do it. So what's going on here? Like, what is why aren't people vibe coding yet?
Well, and again, the wording of the question is definitely in the Survey microsite. I try to be very specific. I linked to the Wikipedia page for it. It's it's a term that came up in the past year or so, and I only refer to it because, well, one, uh, we definitely had leadership at Stack Overflow. They're like, you should be asking about vibe coding. We want to know. But it's has, I think it's a loaded term, and maybe there's some. Uh, I feel like it's the loaded nature of it is because it infers maybe that you are not capable of doing your work. You need the help, and I think a lot of people that have worked with these tools more know that that's not the case, but they still are not like, I'm not going to call it vibe coding. So that is why I added that emphatic part in there. Whenever it was an open response question, so I used an NLP algorithm to sort of group together a lot of the responses, and they were very colorful responses. And in general, we had a question. I added a give us feedback on the survey question this year. And we got a lot of feedback in the survey in general of like, I don't like that you asked so many AI questions this year. So,
Yeah.
the Stack Overflow community is more aligned with the human part of the process for developing, getting answers, thinking through problems. I think that the reason for the response for vibe coding in the survey this year was what it was, is because they are doing all of those things. They are thinking through, using their own skills. They are using AI tools. They are starting to use AI agents, but they would never call what they're doing vibe coding because they are still, there's definitely the human in the loop, like, emphatically that, yes. Emphatically no, they're not just, like, walking away from the computer, refilling their coffee cup, and coming back to a finished product.
Yeah, there's definitely a negative connotation with the term that I feel like it doesn't deserve at this point. I wonder if maybe if you next year, just as a recommendation, I guess, if you called it agentic coding, maybe
Yeah.
there would be a lot more positive, or maybe even do both. Like, do you vibe code? Do you agentic code, and sort of see the difference in results?
Well, and also I think the loaded term, it kind of is giving Gen Z vibes. And so we have, like I said, we have a older skewed respondent base, and they're like, no, I'm not Gen Z. I'm not doing skibbity whatever.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's yeah, I'm with you on that. So, all right. So, I'm going to close out with some high level takeaways from this. So, one of the things we've been talking a lot about, professional developers, organizations that are dealing with, poor job satisfaction, complacency at work. So, for our audience of engineering leaders who are listening right now, they're probably thinking about things like retention, team health. Like, what are the biggest takeaways from the survey that you have on how to re-engage those developers who might be feeling complacent or just down about their work?
Yeah. So I would refer back to those top facets that respondents ranked like the top three for what contributes to their job satisfaction. While maybe many leaders, they definitely have a say in compensation, they might be a little hamstrung on that. But the autonomy at work and solving real world problems could definitely be something that becomes more of a focus. And I I think that, something that's come up in I've heard from our leadership, and I've heard from this podcast, is the idea that, instead of it being top down mandated, here's a tool, use it, or consequences, it's trying to encourage like what do you think? Getting input from the development teams about these AI tools, or if we should implement this, rather than just having the finance team, set up a workflow that is like, all right, get used to it. This is what we're doing. It's that part can incur one. It will bring into the collaboration factor up, that we're having like open conversations, trying things out together. trying to find solutions that work well for everyone that's going to be involved with the AI tooling that is going to impact their work. But also giving them that space to learn that they, so we all need to learn in order to use some of these tools. Some of them are easier than others, and that they have time at work to like really dig in and give it, the time that it needs so that it can become part of their workflow. It can be, and it's not less of that frustrating factor of like, this failed a couple of times and I don't have time for this. I don't have time to learn how to fix it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I got one more question before I let you go. So as you're looking forward to 2026, what are the trends that you're watching? And specifically, like what would you want to evaluate when the survey comes out next year?
I mean, I think the biggest one is I'm always constantly interested in how developers are learning. I know that they are of every age range, of every experience level. They are learning every year. They're learning for different reasons. They're using different ways to learn. So that's top of mind for me. One of the new questions we asked this year was about which community platforms have you been using in the past year? And, Stack Overflow is one of them, but it's just so interesting to see how YouTube continues to be it's a huge community platform for developers. And, podcasts definitely, I think it plays into that too. Getting to see like those overviews, the video format. So, what I want to continue to explore, like what new things are coming out that are helping developers or anyone in the tech space learn, and how is that changing? And, how is uh, digging more into this, the idea of like how has work been affected by new tools rather than just like asking uh, the trust question and the favorability question. But that could easily be, we dig into that a lot more. Like, what are you doing with this? I feel like we already asked a bunch of questions, so I'll remove some of them. I'll replace them. So there's not just like a whole entire AI survey, but there's so many things to ask about. And you know what? Going back to, I just started looking at the JetBrains developer survey for this year. They mentioned they asked 500 questions.
Wow.
So, yeah, I only asked like 70. So, it could be worse.
Yeah. And with AI, it's more easy than ever to generate survey questions,
Yeah,
right?
and you know what that uh, you know, anyone can use AI to answer any of these open response questions. I read them. I'm like, there's no way AI, especially the vibe coding one, AI did not respond to that question.
Yeah. All right. Well, Erin, this has been really fantastic. Before we wrap, where can our listeners follow your work and learn about what's going on over at Stack Overflow?
Yes, I definitely encourage anyone to go check out the Stack Overflow blog. I usually post a survey analysis there. We're going to have a new survey analysis coming out soon about what developers are frustrated by and spending time on at work. And check out Stack Overflow. We have tons of new stuff coming up soon that is going to be really exciting. StackOverflow.com.
Fantastic. We'll be sure to link to everything in our show notes. And that's all for this week. But remember, you're only getting half the story if you're only listening to this podcast. Go check out our Substack, devinterrupted.substack.com, to find all of our in-depth news articles and stories. And Erin, we'd love to have you back sometime, either on our Substack, on the podcast. We always enjoy having a conversation with you. And thanks again. It's been a ton of fun having you here.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.